Since then, the county and the city have been working with a consultant to develop sufficient information that could be provided to FEMA for development of new DFIRMs that address coastal surge flooding as well as rainfall-induced flooding areas of risk. That effort has been completed, and FEMA has utilized the information to draft a preliminary DFIRM for the entire county. Based upon the information provided to FEMA, the new DFIRM looks significantly different than the current flood insurance rate map. There is no longer any flood zone D, which currently covers almost all of Golden Gate Estates and up to Immokalee. There is also a great change in the large flood zone X that covers much of the urban area of the county. The impacts to being in a flood zone starting with the letter V or A is the mandatory purchase of flood insurance if there is any federal funding or existing federally backed mortgages associated with the structure. Now, if you own your own home outright, there is no requirement to purchase flood insurance. Due to the mapping scale, FEMA will not be isolating out the individual house pads as tiny X zones. Many of the house pads may be high enough to qualify for a letter of map change or LOMC if the owner chooses to apply to FEMA. By successfully completing the letter of map change process, the house can be documented as being high enough to be rated as flood zone X and thus be removed from the mandatory flood insurance requirement. Now, to start the LOMC process, the owner must have an elevation certificate prepared by a licensed surveyor. Costs for this can widely vary depending upon the urgency, workload, and effects of grouping. Generally, if multiple neighbors on the same street work together to develop a group package with a surveyor, the individual share cost is reduced. The application information for the LOMC process is available on FEMA's website. Just go to colliergov.net/flood maps for the link. Additionally, it is a great resource for all questions concerning the preliminary DFIRM. Generally speaking, properties in the Golden Gate Estates and extending to the Immokalee area will use the Letter of a Map Amendment for LOMA application form. Principal Project Manager Robert Wiley demonstrates how it is possible for a house pad to receive an elevation certificate.
Well, let's talk about the typical example we're going to have in Golden Gate Estates. That is the area, and most people are concerned about because of the rainfall analysis. It is being brought to within a special flood hazard area with an extensive amount of flood zone AH. What we see in the estates is typically you have the natural ground. That's what's going to show up on the base topography that we use to develop the map. So that's your starting ground point. But we also know within the county that we have people who will come in as part of the building permit and you get approval to put a fill pad in. And that fill pad has certain dimensions and certain heights to it. Then on top of the fill pad, they pour the slab for the house and they build a house slab on grade. So with your fill pad, typically it's going to be somewhere in the range of about 15 to 18 inches above the ground elevation. Now what we see within the storm itself is it's going to be putting water elevations in a typical situation in the estates such that it's going to be hitting the side of the pad, but it would not be high enough to come up into the house. And this is what we're talking about going through with a surveyor to be able to show you qualify with sufficient elevation to get the letter of map amendment. The surveyor will come in, he will survey the floor elevation of your house. Now he gets the lowest floor elevation in the living area. He will also get the garage floor elevation. Then they will come and they will survey all around the outside of the house where the ground comes up against the structure. Those are the bits of information that go onto the elevation certificate. And with the surveyor's elevation information, he will show you whether or not this elevation of the ground around the house as well as the floor elevation are higher than the elevation shown in the AH flood zone. If all of those elevations are above this flood elevation, you would qualify for a LOMA. Now, there are certain situations that we know within the estates where people do not build a fill pad to that extent. They have a lower fill pad, and then they actually construct what's called a stem wall foundation. At that point, the surveyor will survey the ground at the base of the stem wall, exactly as he's supposed to do, where the ground comes up against the structure. But we see also then that the flood zone elevation through their AH will come up against the edge of the stem wall. It is still below the floor elevation, but is above the point where the building's foundation touches the ground. Those structures would not be able to go through the letter of map amendment process. They would be able to prove they qualify meeting the minimum requirements to get the cheaper price for the AH flood zone, because they do have the floor elevation above the base flood elevation. And base flood elevation is a term we use for that storm that we model. It's the 1% annual chance event. Some people call it the 100-year event, but that's really a misnomer. Every year there's a 1% chance that this flood level could be achieved in Collier County. So that's what I call it, base flood. That's the base number against which you place everything. So in those situations, they would not be able to go through the letter of map amendment, as we said, but would qualify for the economical price on the flood zone AH. That's a typical example we would have in the estates and also parts of the urban area.
A series of public informational meetings were held in August to allow residents to view the new maps, understand how their properties may be affected, and learn more about the financial steps they may need to take to comply with federal flood insurance requirements. Now, if you were not able to attend those meetings, those same maps are still available on the internet. There is about a 4-month window of time for owners to submit comments and file appeals if they have sufficient scientific evidence to support their disagreement with the preliminary DFIRMs. The appeals process starts once FEMA publishes notices in the local newspaper. It appears that as many as 50,000 structures throughout the county may be affected by the flood zone changes. So there may be a surge in demand for surveyors and professional engineers to provide elevation certificates and engineering flood analysis in the coming months. The FEMA Map Modernization Program was mandated by Congress, and from the onset, Collier County was committed to producing the most accurate set of maps based on the competent analysis of the latest hydrological and geographical data.
It's critical to know that this project is not a Collier County sponsored project. This is a national program required by FEMA. It is mandatory by the federal government. And I asked the question to the FEMA representatives, where does this money go? The money from the flood insurance program goes into a flood insurance fund to pay out on claims and losses. It doesn't go to subsidize FEMA and other programs as of right now. So it is a federally mandated program. The Board of County Commissioners has gone out of their way to help the citizens and spend some extra time explaining to them what the impact is to Collier County. FEMA's only here for 5 days, and then they leave. The impact is obviously a lot longer than that, and that's why the board has really stepped up and tried to assist the citizens in this process.
If the new FEMA maps put you in a flood zone, you can get grandfathered in with lower rates if the required flood insurance is purchased before the maps become official, which we expect to happen in 2011. Now, you may be grandfathered in at a lower rate for 2 years. The National Flood Insurance Program states that between 20 to 25% of its claims are from outside high-risk flood areas. So, no matter where you live in Collier County, buying flood insurance may still be your best bet.
Every place in Collier County is technically in a flood zone. I mean, if you're trying to be proactive and as conservative as you can, you'd want to purchase flood insurance. Because remember, this mandatory flood insurance is for a storm that is within 1% chance in 100, 1 in 100, 1% chance in a 100-year period that you're going to flood. So you're not required to if you have a federally backed mortgage, but it's still to your benefit sometimes to purchase flood insurance. Because at that point, if you are not in a zone A or V, that rate has been reduced quite a bit. So it might be cost effective for you to have that.
A NFIP policy can be purchased starting at just over $100 a year. Now, you may be required to purchase a flood insurance policy as a condition of receiving federal disaster assistance. Any mortgage loaner has the legal right to require the purchase of flood insurance regardless of risk. We hope this program has helped you better understand the preliminary digital flood insurance rate maps. Now, for more information, visit colliergov.net/flood maps or call 252-2942 Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with questions about the DFIRMs.